Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Like Father, Like Son music podcast. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Jonas, and we'll be showcasing discographies of punk, metal, hardcore, or any other bands we enjoy listening to.
And today's episode, since it's our very first, we decided to go with the Kings of Thrash, Slayer. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. We're going to go through Slayer's discography, studio releases only. We're not going to mention demos. And as far as live albums, we'll mention them if they're a studio release, but no bootlegs, no stuff like that. And we'll go right in order. So we're going to start off with 1983's Show No Mercy. This featured the original lineup of Jeff Hanneman, Tom Araya, Kerry King, and Dave Lombardo on drums.
So with 1983's Show No Mercy, this was the only Slayer album that featured all the members, when it came to guitar and bass, playing an E tuning. Afterwards, all of them switched to primarily E flat.
So what I really love about this album is just the overall feel and sound for it. It was really different than anything that was, I'll say, anything that was attainable at the time. There were some bands that were putting out demos, and you had like Hellhammer and bands like that had that really kind of dark sounding
raw energy,
thrash metal. Maybe like this Possessed, was it this preceded Possessed, right? It was before Possessed?
Before, yeah.
But Show No Mercy and the first Possessed album, I really feel like they had a similar feel to them.
Yeah.
I'll take Show No Mercy every day. I love Possessed, but I really love this album. It was on the Metal Blade label. So yeah, we're gonna talk about our favorite songs off the album. If you want to start with your 3 top songs.
Yeah, sure. So my top 3 from this release would have to be Fight Till Death, Antichrist, and then definitely Black Magic. It was one of the first Slayer songs that I ever learned on guitar, so it's definitely stayed with me throughout the years.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with Black Magic. That's one of my top 3. The first track, Evil Has No Boundaries, I love that song, and I'm a huge fan of Die by the Sword. There's really not a bad song on this. We just forced ourselves to pick our 3
narrow
tops.
It down.
But yeah, I think that it's a fantastic album. I heard this later in my teen years, and I'll get to the album that I heard first. So this was purchased after, but just a great album. All right, so moving right along, we're gonna go into 1984. So a year later, an EP came out called Haunting the Chapel. And it only had 3 songs on it, if you picked up the vinyl back in 84. But there's one reason that everybody needed this album, and that is Chemical Warfare, because it was the only release that had that song at the time. And that is one of my all-time favorite Slayer songs. So I had this album, and I loved it, and I played it all the time. 3 songs, super short EP, but just so great.
Yeah. And then with this EP, what I like about it too is it features the song Aggressive Perfector, which could have been found on Metal Blade's release of Metal Massacre 3. It was the first time anyone had really heard Slayer, and it was the first time they ever released anything physical. So with this EP, it really showcases a little bit of what they're all about.
Yeah, for sure. And also that same year, they released the live album Live Undead, which I like a lot of live albums, but that one is just so good.
Yeah,
like it's you feel like you're in the club when they're playing. They left in all the crowd noises. It sounds chaotic. It just sounds like it's just insane. I would have loved to have caught them early on in California in a small club. Would have just been fantastic.
Yeah, no, it truly captures that raw energy that's definitely present in their concerts. through the years to come, the decades that they had been playing. So I definitely appreciate that album as a live album. It's probably one of my favorites when it comes to live releases.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, so moving along, a year later, 1985, the first official full length, I guess. Show No Mercy is a full length. It was a short album, but Hello 8 came out, and it changed everything. That album, they went more aggressive, a little less darkness in there, but just pure evil. And just with the title track alone, that intro, I remember like spinning that record and playing it backwards because that intro there is actually recorded backwards. So just a great album cover. Everything about it just screamed like you had to buy that. Like if you saw it in a store, you had to buy it because it was amazing. What do you think about your top 3 tracks on that one?
Oh, so my top 3 for this album would totally have to be Kill Again, Praise of Death, and At Dawn They Sleep. All of the songs, throughout the record, it's totally like, Merciful Fate, worship. You can definitely tell who their inspirations are. And you could even consider taking that album with Possess 7 Churches and then Sepultura's Bestial Devastation. Those are totally, I think, like proto death metal before it really became actual genre.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one, I definitely agree with At Dawn They Sleep. I think that song is it's so good.
Yeah.
For me, it's going to be that one, the title track, Hello 8's. It's really that whole intro, and then when it drops in, it's just, it just gets you.
Yeah.
Gives you goosebumps. And Necrophiliac is my third. It's hard to pick, especially off of their early stuff, like your favorites.
Yeah.
And we had to really like listen to them again, and like it really, anytime you listen to these, you're gonna be like, oh, this is my favorite, and then the next time you're gonna be like, this one
changes completely for sure.
But yeah, great album from 1985. That also, the albums we've talked about so far was the original lineup, and also all of them up till now were Metal Blade releases, and then we get into 1986. Things really changed. They went with Def Jam Records, which at the time was like LL Cool J,
like Ice-T.
But man, Rain in Blood.
Yeah.
Rain in Blood came out, and just I shit my pants. It was like, so this was, for me, this was the first Slayer album that I actually owned, and the reason that I got it was somebody had given me a mixtape back in high school, junior high, and it had Piece by Piece on it and Altar of Sacrifice, and there were a bunch of other bands on that cassette, but those 2 songs forced me. I think it was like the next day that I went down to my local record store, and they didn't have it on vinyl, but I had the cassette. And through high school, I wore out 2 or 3 of those cassettes because I just played it. Super short album, but it's the shit. And with the cassette, it just repeated on each side.
Yeah.
So I would just flip it and flip it and flip it. What do you think about this album?
With this record, it totally caught me by surprise. I remember years ago when I was real little, I was made an MP3 player. It was one that you made for me, actually. And it had a bunch of bands from, a variety of genres. But I remember that there was a few songs on there from Slayer. Ones that I can think of specifically were like Raining Blood, Postmortem, Piece by Piece, I believe, was on there too. Super fast record. It's less than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Not really anything that anyone could expect at that time. With this album specifically, they tend to focus a lot on things such as like, religion, murder, biological warfare, occult, and then specifically the controversial song Angel of Death, made it so then they were kind of marked as like neo-Nazis, and their logo was looked into in depth, with like the S at the beginning of their logo.
Yeah, well, this also was happening at the time of the PMRC.
Yep.
Tipper Gore was pushing to ban all records by any metal band, and really what she did, we should thank her for, because she made controversial records had to be stamped with that little explicit sticker. And I remember any record I saw with that,
So
I was like, yep,
so
I'll take
intriguing.
this.
No, yeah.
So completely backfired. But this album is just, it's fantastic start to finish. It's one of those albums that you really can't just be like, I'm going to listen to Altar of Sacrifice today. Like, you've got to start it and finish it.
Yeah.
It's just a masterpiece.
It's an album that's
all
totally
around.
meant to be started at the very, very beginning. And,
Yeah,
and
definitely. It's in my top 5 of all time, and teeters on that 1 and 2 spot. It's just a fantastic album.
Yeah. Yeah. So with this album, my top 3 would totally have to be Jesus Saves, that slow beginning and just going into that ripping fast verses, chorus, all of it. I just love that song. Altar of Sacrifice, and then definitely Postmortem. I remember trying to learn that on guitar and trying to sing it at the same time, and I get to the really fast part at the end before Raining Blood, and it was always super difficult, but that song just is so good.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, for me, Altar of Sacrifice, and that goes back to that demo, that mixtape that somebody gave me. I played that to death and memorized the lyrics, and the lyrics on that are just so incredibly evil.
Yeah.
I fell in love with that. So that's at the top for me. And then Postmortem, Raining Blood, back to back. So those would be my 3 favorite. But this album it's so hard to choose 3 of your favorites. This needs to be listened to front to back for sure.
No, of course.
This was, in my opinion, Slayer's absolute peak. And it was great because they had some great albums right before that, but this one really just blew the lid off of everything. And if it wasn't for this album, there wouldn't be a lot of bands that are out there now. This album influenced everybody that was in the metal scene and that was playing thrash metal and speed metal. It's a perfect thrash album.
Well, it's so funny with this release too in this year, because you started getting bands like Cryptic Slaughter who totally wanted to almost compete against bands like Slayer and be like, no, I'm the fastest band. Yeah. During this time, it was totally a competition to see who could play the fastest and the heaviest. So it's cool to see, that they kind of inspired other bands to want to, play faster than this record specifically. Yeah,
I think that a lot of that came from Jeff Hanneman and Dave Lombardo. They were both really, really into the punk scene, Dead Kennedys and DRI and stuff like that. And they brought that flavor into Slayer. They were always a thrash band, but I think this album in particular, they really took it up a notch, and those super fast drum beats and just chaotic soloing and chaotic vocals. It was just definitely worked in conjunction with the American hardcore movement that was happening at that time.
Yeah.
And also, sent a lot of bands into what we now know as crossover.
Yeah.
They were really, I wouldn't say that this is a crossover album, but it influenced a lot of hardcore bands to put some metal into their albums, especially right at this time.
Yeah, with for example, DRI's that album Crossover. That was released around that time.
I think it was actually 86, maybe 87.
Yeah.
But yeah, that album is also amazing, and we will definitely do an episode on DRI.
Oh yeah, of course.
For sure.
Yeah.
So next, after 2 years, they did 86, and then their next release was 1988, also on Deaf American, still with the original lineup with South of Heaven. And, when you're coming off of Rain and Blood, the perfect album, it's I remember when this came out, and I was nervous. I was nervous to hear it, because I was like, how do you top Rain and Blood.
No, yeah.
And it wasn't about topping it. They took it somewhere different.
Yeah.
And as far as like production, I love the production on this album. They went from like, that really dark sounding early stuff, and then the chaotic Rain and Blood. And then this album just had something really unique about it, and really like, I don't know, it just had such a cool fuzzy sound.
Yeah.
Like it had a warmth to it, but was still just a fantastic metal album. And they brought it. They definitely brought it hard on this album, and it was not a disappointment by any stretch of the imagination. Usually when a band peaks like that, their next album is like, it's okay, but it's no Rain and Blood. Well, they just kind of sidestepped and did something completely different. Not completely different, but different.
Yeah, no.
And kept everything fresh and new. And I think a lot of that credit does have to definitely go to Jeff Jam Records and what's his name?
Rick
Rubin. Guy's a genius. So this album, really, really great. Also, just want to mention, first tour that I saw Slayer was for South of Heaven, the South of Heaven tour. I think I saw them a couple times. I think Clash of the Titans with them, and it was like them, Megadeth, Anthrax. Testament, and Alice in Chains opened up, which was weird. So they had just come out.
Yeah.
So this is another tough one to pick out favorites, but what do you got for this?
So for my three, it would definitely have to be Spill the Blood, the song Live Undead, and then Behind the Crooked Cross. With this album, I would take this over Raining Blood, just because I totally appreciate the dynamic Doom-esque sound.
Yeah, that fuzziness.
Yeah, during this time, Kerry King was found saying that, quote, they were bored of the satanic lyrics that they had been using in the past like 3 or so releases. And with this album, the South of Heaven tour, it made it so they got banned in a lot of venues, like, in like Los Angeles, New York, and stuff like that. So it's definitely an album where when I first heard it, I felt like it's so corny, but like so evil.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. With like Spill the Blood and stuff like that. That's, clean intro.
Yep. Yeah, and the drumming on this really stood out for me. It's just Dave Lombardo was just on his game on this. Just really, really great. He was great in all their albums, Rain and Blood especially, super fast. But this really showed off his stack work. So for me, I'm actually with you on 2 of these: Mandatory Suicide, Live Undead, and Spill the Blood.
Yeah,
I think those are 3 great songs. Again, there's not a bad song on this. Even Dissident Aggressor, which is a Judas Priest cover, but a really cool cover of that song. Fantastic album. Okay, 1990, still on Deaf American Records, and still the original lineup. Seasons in the Abyss. Now, this one, for me, took me a little bit of getting used to, and I think it's really just a production issue. You went from the dark stuff on the early albums, like kind of cruddy production, but in a good way. Then you had Rain and Blood, which was over the top, blow your eardrums out. Then we get into South of Heaven, which was kind of that fuzzy sounding, kind of, I don't want to say soothing, but it was kind of soothing. Like it had a good feel to it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And then Season in the Abyss came out, and this one I had an issue with the production at first.
Yeah.
And it just took my ears a little bit to get used to it. The songs on it are great. The lyrics on it are great. It's Slayer through and through. Yeah. But this one, for whatever reason, I had a little trouble with. It took me a little longer to really start loving this album, and I finally did, and I think I saw them on this tour as well. But yeah, that the opening of War Ensemble was almost too much for me at the time, because I'm thinking
It's like anxiety
Yeah, it was just
inducing.
like I was like 17 years old, I think, when this came out, 1990. So I was about 17, and yeah, it definitely like had that like really abrasive edge to it that I guess I wasn't expecting it coming off of South of Heaven. I kind of thought we were going to continue with that.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I love about Slayer is that they're just kind of up and down with the production and stuff like that. I think it's just whatever sounds good to them is like, yep, that's what we're doing, which I totally respect. What do you think of this album?
So with this album, I remember my introduction to this album was going through your cassette collection. You had this on cassette, and at first I was confused because on the front of it there's no actual like Slayer written on it, and I was so used to like seeing such like terrifying like album covers, you know, with like South of Heaven and like Rain and Blood. So seeing that album cover with just like the skeleton head, it totally threw me off. But after listening to it, it's such a good album. I remember like being with my friends and stuff, and we'd watch like the Seasons in the Abyss music video with them on like the camels in the middle of the desert.
Such a great video.
Oh yeah.
I remember like staying up late to watch Headbangers Ball, hoping to catch that video, and luckily they did play it fairly often. But it's a really cool video for a great song.
Even with like War Ensemble too. That's a cool music video.
Yeah, for sure.
Such a fast song. It's totally like, it is anxiety inducing just because of how fast it is, with like, you know, Lombardo's like tom work, and then like Araya's just vocals, and you know, the guitar work and all that stuff.
I think it's really that song when it kicks off, it's just like it's a shock to your system. It's really even now, like when you start that, it's a great song to start the album off, because it's like you're off and running, you know, this is it, like here we go. What do you got for your favorites on this one?
So for my favorites, I would totally have to do the title track, Seasons in the Abyss, the song Dead Skin Mask. When I first found this album, I was really into like all the classic horror movie stuff, and I had just like discovered like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So knowing that song was like inspired by like Ed Gein and stuff like that, it was totally cool to listen to. And then I like Spirit Black. That's another good song.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking about that. Dead Skin Mask was such a departure from Slayer, you know, but it was such a cool song to just stick in there, like that slow, creepy song, and they still play it. Not anymore, but prior to them retiring, they were still playing it pretty much every show.
Yeah.
So always a fan favorite. My tops on this are Spirit in Black. That guitar riff on that is just fantastic. Seasons in the Abyss is just perfect. Yeah. And War Ensemble, just because of that frightening opening, I think it fits really well.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to a live album, double live album, actually. 1991, Decade of Aggression. A good album. I don't think it's nowhere near Live Undead, but I think it had a good overall cover of what Slayer was. You know, you had like really old stuff. You had like Black Magic on there, Chemical Warfare, right up through Seasons. So it was a good, like, it was a decent album.
Yeah. No, so with this album, I remember the one specific memory with this album I remember having is I would go to the songs like Postmortem and Jesus Saves, where there's the really fast parts on vocals, and I remember trying to see if Tom Araya could actually like sing that fast live, because I remember listening to it like the studio stuff, and I was like, oh, this is so fast. I don't understand how he can do that, you know, like that this quick. So I remember I would constantly go to, you know, the live tracks on that album, and I was like, oh wow, like definitely blown away with how fast Tom Araya could be. So aggressive, but at the same time, lyrical content just ripping through. Yeah,
it's definitely a good. I remember having I didn't have the vinyl. I don't know if they originally released it on vinyl. I know years later they repressed it, but I had it was a double cassette. those two
Oh,
cassette
really?
package. You had cassette 1 and cassette 2.
That's cool.
And I remember like driving around and having that in the cassette deck in the car. And they also released a video for, was it Raining Blood? I think Postmortem Raining Blood.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that on like Headbangers Ball or something like that. So that was 1991. They took a little break after 1990's Season the Abyss. In 1994, on American Records, which was still Deaf American, but they changed it to just American for whatever reason. And this saw the introduction of a new drummer.
Paul Bostaff, formerly from the thrash band Forbidden.
So Divine Intervention. This one didn't hit me right. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
It was really just, it was the cover. It was the loss of the Slayer logo. You know, that disappeared. It was a weird time for metal. 1994. Things were getting a little weird.
Well, this was like the uprising of like the grunge scene and stuff, right?
Yeah. So there was definitely some experimenting going on with Slayer. Nothing too crazy, but kind of lost my attention for a little bit on this one. And it wasn't due to Lombardo leaving. I think that as a band, I think they were just trying to do something different and stay relevant, which I respect. But yeah, this one I got a little lost with. What did you think of this one?
See, with this album, I kind of think the opposite with this album with Paul Bostaff on the drums. Just considering now that like I really look out for like, you know, very technical drumming and stuff, and I love his work in Forbidden. So hearing him on like for the first time on a Slayer record is so cool to me. I totally agree with the, you know, how it's odd with the loss of the Slayer logo.
Yeah.
It's just really weird. But with this album, especially during the period of time that it was released in, I definitely do appreciate it because I think it's Slayer sticking to being Slayer. With this record, you still get like the aggressiveness of Slayer as times are changing. It's not like, you know, Metallica, they switched to like hard rock kind of. Yeah.
No, and I'm sure that within the band, you know, losing a core member after so many years, I'm sure that kind of put everything kind of on a swivel, and you know, they're trying to, you know, the drummer's always the backbone of the band, and like all of a sudden this guy who they've been playing with forever is gone, and they have a new drummer who's absolutely incredible. So I think there was just some adjustments going on. I'm not saying it's a bad album by any means. It just threw me a little bit. And I got to say, I was a huge Dave Lombardo fan, and I was like kind of like bent out of shape about it. I got over it. The album itself is actually pretty good. It's got some decent songs on it. It was just something that I didn't spend a lot of time with. Really, you know, 1994 I was really getting into like death metal and stuff like that. You know, the 1991 era hit, all those Florida death metals started popping up, all those bands.
And then like the New York
Angel
scene.
Yeah, like there was just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of fresh music, and here comes Slayer, and I guess it just kind of got lost in the shuffle for me. But after listening to it a couple times again, I appreciate what they were doing. This one was tough with songs for me, but what did you like on this?
So with my 3 songs that I picked the song Ditto Head. I remember seeing that live close to around the time that Slayer retired, and that's such a good song. Sex, Murder, Art is another good song. And then I really like the song Serenity and Murder. I believe they released a Serenity and Murder EP.
They did, yes. 1995. Which is weird because it was after the album came out, which was a little weird, but I guess they kind of were like, here's like a single, and that had 3 live songs on it as well. Yeah, we're gonna go opposites on this one. I do like Serenity and Murder.
Yeah.
My favorite on this though is the seventh track, SS3.
Yeah.
I really really like that. Killing Fields is the first track, and Fictional Reality. Those are my top three for this. I do remember seeing the Ditto Head video.
Yeah.
At that time, yeah, it was floating around a little bit, but yeah, overall, a different album. Still Slayer, still pretty good.
See, with this album, with the Serenity and Murder EP, I remember not too long ago. It was like a few years ago, but I saw that photo of the guy with Slayer carved into his back.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so I guess with that, the only reason he did it is because I saw like an interview with the dude, and he did it because he thought he'd get laid from it, which is so like in a nutshell, it's definitely like early 90s like teenager like, oh, if I do this I'm gonna get laid, and it's the fucking Slayer logo carved into his back. But that's such like nasty photo, but still cool at the same time.
Yeah. All right, so that was, what do we say, that was 1996.
Yes.
So the same year.
It was 96.
Okay, so the same year, also on American Records, Undisputed Attitude came out. And this was just a bunch of punk songs from bands like Verbal Abuse and TSOL, Minor Threat, DRI, Dr. No, the Stooges, and it did include one Slayer song, Gemini, and something that I learned recently that I just didn't know. I really didn't listen to this album all that much.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of like a novelty type thing. But the band Pap Smear was Jeff's side project.
You were telling me about that.
Which I just didn't know. I was going through this, preparing for this, and I was like, oh, Pap Smear, and I think it was on like Wikipedia. It said that it was his side project. I think this album is good for what it is. My only issue with this album is I'm going to lay this all on Jeff, because Jeff loved the punk scene, and I think more so than anybody in that band, and Dave Lombardo. I think that if Dave had played on this, it would have been just a little better. And that's not saying anything against Paul, but I know that Dave was really, really into a lot of hardcore stuff. DRI, he was a lot of times wearing a DRI shirt in those early photos and early shows. But what do you think about this punk album?
So with this album, I remember very specifically I had just found Dr. No, and I listened to their song Mr. Freeze. And then I remember looking it up on, I think it was Spotify, and seeing like said Mr. Freeze and then said Slayer underneath it. And I was like, oh, what's this? So that was the way I found this album. I think with a lot of the songs, they're really good in my opinion. Cover wise, at least, I love, Richard Hung Himself. That's such a good song. I love that band DI. I'm pretty sure that's the band, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that song's really good. I love Mr. Freeze, and then all the Minor Threat songs they did were really good. They really picked up Minor Threat's, energy and just took it a step further, picked up the pace on it, and those are all really good tracks.
The Minor Threat covers are definitely good. For me, the Verbal Abuse songs are just over the top good. And again, I'm gonna lay that at the feet of Hanneman. He was a big Verbal Abuse fan. I know for a fact. And I was a little disappointed on the DRI track, Violent Pacification. For whatever reason, they changed the lyrics on that. And I'm a huge DRI fan, and I know their lyrics. Even the super fast songs, I know all the lyrics. And for whatever reason, they changed them, and it just sounded a little off. They also changed the lyrics on the Stooges, I Want to Be Your Dog.
They did?
They changed it to I want to be your God. But it's a great cover.
Yeah.
I really like that one.
See, I don't even think I didn't even know they did a Stooges cover on that album. I didn't even hear that.
And I'm not a huge Stooges fan, but I really like that song. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So a cool little album, and, you know, probably I'm just guessing here, but I would assume that this was something that they did in studio kind of to work Paul in. You know, like, hey, let's have some fun and you know, just get everybody used to each other. I'm sure that's not an easy thing to do, and that's my guess is that's what happened here. And I'm sure Jeff was kind of pushing for something like this because he really was into a lot of punk and hardcore. But, so overall, I think it was a cool album. You get 2 albums in 1996, so sure, why not?
Can't complain.
So let's see. Oh boy. All right. I don't know about this one. 1998. Diabolus in Musica. So,
Jesus.
Yeah, this is Slayer trying to stay relevant in the new metal scene. I really feel that way. I think, you know, we had like Slipknot was big, and Korn, and who else was a System of a Down, and like all these like Mudvayne and fucking
POD.
Yeah, like all these just. And we're not taking anything away from some of those bands. We like System of a Down and some Slipknot stuff. And,
I like Korn.
Korn. But this is a tough one.
This is like Slayer's Saint Anger. I totally see it. Like, you got Metallica's Saint Anger. You have like Megadeth's album Risk, which is kind of controversial. Not a lot of people like that album. And then with In Diabolus and Musica, this album's totally Slayer's Saint Anger.
Yeah. This one, when this came out, it made me really nervous. I gotta say, I thought it was over. I was like, this is just, it did nothing for me at the time. It still does nothing for me. The cover was just goofy. It had that guy in the robe, and again, no Slayer logo. It's like,
they took the band's name and made it all like cult-esque looking. Like, tried making them into different symbols and stuff. Yeah,
it was just kind of silly. Maybe just trying a little too hard, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what was going on inside the band at that time, but man, I'm glad that they turned it around after this album.
Oh yeah,
because it's bad. I picked 3 songs, but this was just me listening to it recently. Just like, okay, I think these are the 3 best songs on the album.
If you had to pick.
I don't even know. Did they tour for this album?
Not that I know.
I don't even know if they did. They probably did like festivals with like, you know, Slipknot and stuff like that. So anyways, what do you got on this album?
I'm gonna be honest. Like, I took a glimpse at this album alone. I took a peek at it with you. I couldn't pick I feel like with this album, all of the songs are so repetitive that in the sense that, like, there's nothing necessarily in the songs that I can take out of and be like, well, this was a good part, you know, to this song. I like this section of it, so I kind of just skipped over it.
It's a tough one. And actually, I do have a note that it might have been on this tour that Paul injured his elbow, and no, actually, it's God Hates Us All. We'll get to that in a second, because Lombardo came back. This album though, I went with the first track, Bitter Peace. If you ask me what that song sounds like right now, I have no idea. I was just, we were like, all right, let's go through the whole discography. I have
to pick a song.
Yeah, so it'd be that, Stain of Mind, and Perversions of Pain. I don't know what any of those songs sound like right now, because they just don't stick with you.
No, yeah,
and, hey, shit happens, and bands put out crap albums, and this is a crap album.
But at least they picked it up afterwards.
Yeah,
this was a little divot in the road. But
they picked it up in a big way. I think 2001, we had a few years of no Slayer.
Yeah.
And 2001, they hit us with God Hates Us All, and it's a killer album.
Oh yeah.
It's Slayer again. So like, big sigh of relief on that one, because I know everybody was nervous, thinking like, what is gonna happen? God Hates Us All came out. They still didn't bring back the original logo, but it had a really cool cover to it.
I like that cover a lot.
It's a really cool cover, and just the title in itself, God Hates Us All, you're like, yep, Slayer's back.
Slayer.
Like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
And this one, Paul was still playing drums on this. This was the tour, though, that he injured his elbow, I was reading, and the following album that's why they brought Dave back in. Dave finished the tour with them for this album. I didn't catch them on this tour, but yeah, God Hates Us All, 2001 on American Records. This is a good album. What do you think?
I love this album. It's so funny because you see when this was released, 2001, on the exact day of 9/11.
9/11, yeah.
It's just super. It's definitely like catches your eye. No one knew, right, September 11 was going to happen. So just to have this album be released on the same days, it's definitely an eerie vibe that you catch from it. But with this album, I love that they just down-tuned. I'm such a sucker for that, like, slow, heavy, down-tuned, riffs. Like you have the song Disciple with the music video. Have you ever seen that music video?
Oh, Disciple, yeah.
Yeah, Disciple.
Yeah, yep.
With them in like the suits, and then they're covered in blood and stuff. It's so cool. But yeah, I love this album.
What do you think? What's your top 3 on this?
So it would definitely have to be title track, God Hates Us All, the song Payback. I love that song. It's just a huge, like, fuck you. It's so fast. I remember hearing it. They played it live. And then I'd have to say the song Cast Down.
Okay. Yep. So for me, Disciple, God Hates Us All. That's Disciple. God Sent Death, and Here Comes the Pain, which is the second to last track, is really definitely worth checking out. And so, like we were saying, this was the tour that Paul, he had an elbow injury, and Dave finished the tour with them and ended up recording with them again on Christ Illusion. But before we get to Christ Illusion, there was another live / remix album that came out. The Soundtrack to the Apocalypse was released in 2003 on American Records. And it's cool for what it is. Live tracks. There's some weird remixes. It's like they had one song with Ice-T.
Yeah.
But it was cool. That actually just reminded me of She Watches Channel Zero. Public Enemy used a Slayer.
Oh, that's right.
Slayer riff from actually I think it was from Angel of Death, and just looped it.
Yeah.
Over that.
It was like the breakdown riff.
Yeah. But yeah, I ran through this real quick. I don't think it's not the greatest. It is what it is. And then that was 2003. So I don't know exactly what happened with Paul. I didn't do a lot of reading on it, but the next album was 2006. So it was 3 years later, and Lombardo was back on drums. So it's the original lineup again. And they hit us with Christ Illusion on American Records still. And this one, for me, I think that this has some similarities to there's some like Seasons in the Abyss mixed in there, and a little bit of South of Heaven. I feel like this was a good representation of Slayer still being Slayer. What are your thoughts on Christ Illusion?
See, with this album, I remember listening to it, and again, I feel like this is one of Slayer's releases where there isn't necessarily anything that like catches my eye. I totally agree with like I find that they took each one of their albums and just kind of took that feel and they put it into this album. There's some vibes from like, Seasons in the Abyss. There's a little bit of like South of Heaven, Rain and Blood. It's just, you got those slow tracks, you got the fast tracks, but I feel like there wasn't really anything that caught my eye. I totally like the album cover with like the Jesus dude on the front of it.
Yeah, and
that's
they
cool.
Was that the one they banned that, right? And then it was just the hand. Is this the album?
Yeah, it was.
They like banned that album, like whatever. Didn't even realize they were still banning album covers. But this one I liked mainly because this kind of got me back into Slayer. I liked God Hates Us All, but I don't know what else I was listening to at the time, but I was preoccupied with other things. So I heard it a bunch of times. I liked it. This one I actually I think I purchased it. I went out and actually got the CD, or somebody burned it for me or something. And I listened to it quite a bit, and I enjoyed it. Are there songs on here that you can choose from, or do you think it's just kind of overall?
So, two specifically that catch my eye. I really like the song Catalyst. And then the one that like separated itself from the others is definitely the song Jihad. I love that intro. It's something different. It has heavy Seasons in the Abyss vibes, and just that song Out of the Rust, I would take that.
Yeah, no, I agree on Jihad. I think that's a good one. Flesh Storm, the first track, and Cult for me.
Yeah.
And so I didn't mention, right before this, they released an EP, which I didn't know anything about, but an Eternal Pyre EP.
I didn't know about that.
I don't know if it was through Fan Club or what it was. It was only 2 tracks. It was, or maybe 3 tracks. Had Cult and War Ensemble. No, so it was just 2 tracks.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was released on CD only or digitally, or if there was a 7-inch. I've never seen a 7-inch.
Yeah.
But it's possible. All right, we're down to the final 2 albums. 2009, American Records. The OG lineup, again.
Yeah.
Brought it all back around. So Lombardo stayed longer than I thought he did. I thought he was kind of in and out again. Like I didn't realize that he was with them for that much longer. World Painted Blood, 2009. What are your thoughts on this album?
So with this album, I feel like it's so Slayer in such a funny way, which is in a sense kind of hypocritical just because of my hate-ish towards Christ Illusion, but I love this album. It's just it's a basic album cover. Like, I'm not necessarily a fan of the album cover. It's like the red background with like the states,
right.
with like skulls and stuff like that. But I think this is a great album. You've got the title track. I love the title track. That was like the first song I heard from this album, and it's so catchy.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
Yeah. What about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'll agree with that title track. I think that was the perfect song to start this album off because it grabbed your attention.
Yeah.
I feel like if they had started off with something else, a lot of people might have just kind of slept on this one.
Yeah.
But that definitely grabbed my attention and made me listen to this. That song, Hate Worldwide, I really liked, and the very last song, Not of This God. I know that, was it Psychopathy Red was like a big deal. They made a video, I think, or something like that.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. It's an okay song. It just really didn't do a whole lot for me. But overall, I was happy with it. I was happy that Slayer was still being Slayer, especially this is 2009. A lot of bands were just putting out absolute garbage.
Yeah.
Metallica. so it was good to have like somebody that was still like carrying the flag, and especially after the scares that we had that they were gonna start being weird. They came back with this and toured with this for a while, and then unfortunately 2013 Jeff Hanneman dies. And that was a tough pill to swallow. Yeah, for me, that was, and I know I wasn't alone in it. I think I was on like Facebook at the time, social media, and man, Slayer got some shit for that.
Really?
You know, well, just deciding to continue.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people, you know, were comparing Kerry and Tom to Gene and Paul from Kiss. Like it was just,
Yeah.
it was really kind of unnecessary. And it swayed a lot of people's opinions of like, oh, they're just looking for money and this and that, which absolutely wasn't true.
Yeah.
Money's not a bad thing to have. So if you're in a band and you're making money, then that's what you're supposed to be doing. But yeah, that was a big bummer. Jeff, I think, was just a fantastic guitarist. He wrote most of my favorite Slayer songs were written by Hanneman, and it wasn't that I was looking at who was writing them. It was just whatever hit my ears a certain way.
All those like war songs.
Yeah, it was just what a really, really great guitarist. And I think that his, again, I'll bring it up again, his punk and hardcore background definitely helped his playing, made him a little different. You know, he wasn't a straightforward speed metal guitarist or thrash metal guitarist. He had some edge that really worked. So that was 2013, and everything was kind of up in the air. They did tour again, and that's when they brought on Gary Holt, which I'm going to say right now, the perfect person to replace Jeff Hanneman.
Yeah.
I think that those two guys had a ton of respect for each other, and I think that Jeff would have been happy with that replacement. Gary Holt's just an absolute beast and a fantastic player.
Well, with Gary Holt specifically, they had been using him for the Big Four shows in like 2010, I think it was, when like Jeff started to have like health complications and stuff like that. So they took him. And yeah, I totally agree with that. I don't think anyone else could have been a better fit.
No, and the energy, I mean, we saw them
twice
with Gary, and just the energy that he brought, it was
for sure.
He really added to Slayer in the latter days, nearing the end of Slayer, and they released one last album in 2015, this time on Nuclear Blast Records.
Yeah.
But this was, the only original members were Kerry and Tom. Paul was back on drums, Gary was on guitar, and the album was Repentless. What do you think about that album?
So with this album in particular, since, you know, there's a huge age gap between you and I remember the first time we saw Slayer live, and they had, the backdrop was this album cover, and I remember it kind of scared me. I was like, oh, this is so creepy. I was trying to like make up like what I was looking at in front of me, this huge, you know, and I remember just seeing them live on that tour. You could feel the fire that they would have on stage from like miles away. But this album in particular, I love this album. You know, the beginning intro going into the title track, you had, you know, songs like You Against You. Gary Holt's solos are just, like I totally appreciate Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman's solos, but when it comes to thrash metal solos, Gary is just so much more intricate, and I just love the tone on this album. And then the song Pride and Prejudice with that super like low tune guitars and stuff like that. I just love that song.
Yeah, no, I'll agree too with you know, Slayer shows are supposed to be intimidating.
Yeah.
And every time I've seen them, I'm intimidated.
Yeah.
You know, from going back from when I was like around your age till the last time that we saw them. Just it's if you've never seen a Slayer show, man, did you miss out.
Oh yeah.
Because there's nothing else like it. It's loud as shit. It's scary. It's the crowd is wild. The heat from the flames is just out of this world. It's really like an absolute all around experience.
It's like an amazing experience.
Yeah. So we were lucky enough to catch them before they retired. But yeah, Repentless, I actually really like this album. I like the song Repentless, When the Stillness Comes, and Atrocity Vendor. I really like that song as well. And after this, they toured, and then they announced
Their
that was
final.
going to be it.
Yeah.
And you know what? I was sad about that, but in the long run, I have a lot of respect for them, and I think going out on top is the way to do it.
Yeah.
And they did. If you saw them on that last tour, man, did they go out on top.
That was so good.
Yeah, they weren't one of those bands that just kind of faded into obscurity. Like they went out on top, and I'm sure that they could have toured for years and years and still filled, packed places and still put out great albums. But I think they did it right, and I know that in the band, like, some of them are like, oh, I didn't want to quit and this and that. But listen, if you got somebody who's just like, I'm not into this anymore, and it's not that they're not into the music, but like they're just done.
Yeah, they were all getting old.
Yeah, and you don't want to see like, 70-year-old Slayer up
Tom
there, like
struggling. Well, yeah, like during that time, like he was starting to have like grandkids. So it's just with that, I remember watching an interview that he did with Loudwire, and it was like you ever seen that? Those Fact or Fiction?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was watching Tom's, and he totally like kind of just like put it out there that they would soon be retiring, because he was like talking about how he loves being on the road and stuff, but like he has like this life going on outside of the music, and I totally respect that. No,
I think that's the way to do it. I think that there are too many bands that don't hang it up when they should hang it up.
Kiss.
Yeah. I mean, well, Kiss is like a novelty act, so it's kind of like when the circus comes to town.
Yeah.
And like, oh, okay, I know all these songs. Nobody's really paying attention to anything new that they're coming out unless you're like an absolute diehard Kiss fan. Everybody wants to hear that old shit. No one wants to here's our new song. We don't want to hear that.
Yeah. No.
But with Slayer, I think they went out on top. It was it was sad because you hate to see a band that they shaped me, they molded me, got me into a lot of other music, and like I said at the beginning of this, they changed metal music across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's thrash metal, death metal, doom, whatever, any big bands that are out there right now will always praise Slayer.
Yeah.
It's like they were the kings. That's all there is to it. They're the kings of thrash metal. Great band. So we're going to do the toughest thing now, which is our top 5 Slayer albums.
I got it right here.
I'll let you go first.
All right.
So go from 5 down to your numero uno.
So with my top 5, I would have to pick God Hates Us All, just because with that album, it gives you a glimpse into like, what if Slayer tuned down, it was like C tuning. It's so heavy, and I just love that album all around. Divine Intervention, just because that gives you a glimpse into Bostoff's, drum work, and he's just an amazing drummer on that record. South of Heaven, for obvious reasons, you gotta, worship those classics, you know what I mean? But, South of Heaven. Rain and Blood, I would definitely put higher than South of Heaven, just because that album has, start to finish, like all those songs go into each other so well. And then my number 1 would have to be Hell Awaits. That is,
all right,
for years, and I think years to come, that'll always be my favorite album. I remember, like, every time I go back to it, there's different things that I find. There's always something new to it, in my opinion.
You know what I like about that album, which we didn't mention, is you can actually hear the bass on that album.
Yeah, yep.
It's one of the only Slayer albums that you can actually hear the bass.
Yeah.
I'm actually a little surprised by that list, but all right. So for me, my number 5, Seasons in the Abyss. Like I mentioned before, it was kind of a shock to the system, but the more I listened to it, the more I started to love it. And really, that album, for me, the title track is just, they could have released just that song, and I'd still put it at my number 5. That track is so goddamn
heavy.
good.
So good.
Number 4 for me is Hell Awaits. Number 3, South of Heaven. Number 2, Show No Mercy. And my number 1, Rain and Blood. For all the reasons that we mentioned earlier, they're all great albums. I think that Slayer overall has a fantastic discography, with the exception of one. we won't mention that one, but
we won't mention names.
So what we wanted to do is, since maybe you live under a rock or in a cave and you've never actually listened to Slayer, what do you think a good first album would be for someone who's never heard a lick of Slayer? What album would you recommend that they go out and pick up or listen to and check out?
I think that album should be South of Heaven. And the reason why I say that is because it preps you for all of their other work. Like, if you go into from Rain and Blood and then you go into South of Heaven, it's a complete change. I feel like with South of Heaven, it definitely preps you for what's to come, despite the fact that came, after, Hell Awaits, Show No Mercy, Rain and Blood and stuff. But I think that's definitely an album that people should find first when it comes to Slayer.
Yep. No, I 100% agree with that. I think that if you've never heard Slayer, which I mean, hey, maybe somebody's watching this and they're like, oh, I don't know much about metal music or Slayer. I've heard the name a million times. I want to check them out.
Seen the shirts.
Yeah. The Kardashians wearing the Slayer shirts or whatever. South of Heaven, I think, is a good, gentle ease into what Slayer really is. And a lot of it has to do with that kind of like doomy, fuzzy, like you're putting on a metal sweater in that album. I think that's a perfect starting point. If you watch this all the way through and you want to, you can always comment and give us your top 5 Slayer albums, because we'd like to hear that too. So thanks for hanging out with us on our first episode, and we'll be back again with a whole new band and a whole new discography to discuss. So thanks for hanging out.